I'm sitting here and I'm humbled with these historical giants, all of whose work I studied in graduate school. And I'm thinking of that Sesame Street song, one of these things is not like the other, one of these things just doesn't belong. But I've been given a mandate by Donald Ritchie, and I'm going to fulfill it. It's actually a dual mandate tonight. I've been asked to reflect on my experiences blogging during the 2008 campaign, and to analyze the elusive concept of centrism during this intense, divisive presidential contest that we witnessed. I'm comfortable talking about centrism to this audience, having just published a book about it, and like all historians, willing to shill shamelessly whenever I have an opportunity. But speaking autobiographically, using the first person rather than the third person on an OAH panel feels illicit, feels kind of naughty. I feel like I'm reading poetry to a group of chemists, or even worse, preaching atheism to a convention of evangelicals. I'm also uncomfortable talking about blogging because, in truth, I'm not a very good blogger. I blog regularly for HNN, for the History News Network, and I want to acknowledge the extraordinary work of Rick Shankman, who's done so much to forge a sense of community among historians when all too often that sense is lacking. And after years of posting my occasional op-eds and reviews, Rick asked me to blog regularly for the 2008 campaign. I started in January 2008, and I did it usually about 2-3 times a week, and daily for 2 weeks in an exhausting marathon building up to Election Day. But as I said, I realized I wasn't a very good blogger. I'm not a good blogger because I write much more in the style of an op-ed, which is about 800 words, than the blogosphere, which wants 300 to 500 words. My style is more formal and less personal, more historical and less hysterical, more complex and less black and white than most bloggers. I'm also not a good blogger because I'm not what one of my friends calls a good citizen of the blogosphere. I don't do cross-posting and blog rolling and all those blogging rituals that you're supposed to do. Rather than aggressively marketing my blog, I tend to invest in the writing of it, coming more from the if you build it, they will come school. But in truth, I wrote it, and I'm not sure how many actually came and clicked. I never want to look at the numbers because it would be too depressing. Finally, I'm not a good blogger because I chose not to be a verbal flamethrower. I wanted to write historically from the center. I didn't consider it my mission, writing as an historian for the History News Network, to push one candidate or another for president. And to the extent that I wanted to push an angle, because historians also have to have a point of view, I wanted to encourage both candidates to move to the center in the hope that whomever would win would govern from the center. But my priority was offering historical perspective, trying to place these fast-moving events in historical context. I wanted to inject some complexity into the discussion, to take issue with the way reporters and politicians have a tendency to oversimplify, and try to bring some multidimensionality to the fast-moving and quite confusing sometimes discussion. And I think that's part of our mission as academics, to acknowledge the world's messiness, to resist the urge toward polarization, partisanship, and simplification, without, of course, being obtuse. And if that makes me and us countercultural, it's a status, it's a mission that I embrace, and that I think we all must embrace. So as a blogger, I imposed rules on myself that I developed over years of writing op-eds for newspapers and appearing on radio and TV. And I have to say that my impressions of what I call insta-history, or academic punditry, come from the late 1980s when I just got my PhD and communism collapsed. And I watched these Kremlinologists, as they called them, which is even a worse name than presidential historian. These Kremlinologists who, for months, for years, have been telling us that Russia would never fall. All of a sudden, the same ones were on CBS News telling us why it was obvious that Russia had fallen without ever acknowledging the error of their ways. So with these cautionary tales in mind, I've tried to follow these basic rules. First, no predicting. I can't tell you how many times I've been called by a producer asked to give some historical perspective on an event, and then with the cameras rolling, the anchor says to me, well, what happens next? I have my set response. I mean, you don't want to insult the anchor because you want to be invited back, because we're all glory hounds. So I say, well, it's hard enough to predict the past, I can't even begin to predict the future. But too much of the modern news business has become about soothsaying, and with reporters failing to give that first draft of history, our historical judgment is rendered irrelevant. So no predicting. Second, no roving. And that's not an attack on George W. Bush's brain, I'll rove. I'm an American historian. My job, when commenting on the public sphere as an historian, is to stick to my area of expertise, and not simply to pontificate on whatever the producer needs me to pontificate about, because he needs a professor to give some kind of imprimatur to the topic at hand. Third, no rushing to judgment. We are historians. Our job is to put the brakes on the conventional wisdom, even when it speeds ahead, to make premature announcements. Our professional commitment to patience puts us in conflict with the dizzying immediacy of the blogging world and the media. And again, that's something that we should embrace. I was on CTV, that's Canadian television, I should inject some Canadian content, when the Supreme Court decided Bush v. Gore in 2000. The CNN feed showed a reporter leafing through the pages of the decision, picking out phrases and mentioning them online, on the air. And then the anchor goes to me and says, well, Professor Troy, having heard this analysis, what's your analysis? I was dumbstruck, but, silence is deadly. What can I say? So I said, well, sometimes in the life of a democracy, you have to keep silent and listen to the sounds of democracy in action. Let's appreciate the silence. We don't hear rumblings of tanks in the streets. We don't hear the staccato sounds of machine guns being fired. Simply, we hear the rumbling of papers as reporters try to understand what the Supreme Court said. Isn't it wonderful? Then they went to somebody else. More recently, I was in the distinct minority of historians who refused during George W. Bush's presidency to answer the question, is George W. Bush the worst president ever? That's a parlor game for journalists. We're supposed to be the ones who say, slow down. Wait for the administration at least to end, or wait 30 years. Assess the data, and then we'll start quibbling, labeling, and oversimplifying. Fourth, keep it historical. In almost every blog posting I write, as in every media appearance I make, I try to inject some historical perspective, some context, some dimensionality to the discussion. I try to avoid what I call the Beschlossization of political commentary, of historical commentary, reeling off a series of historical parallels which reduces history simply to window dressing. Instead, I try, and I confess I don't always succeed, but I try to link events, ideas, personalities to more enduring historical phenomenon, to more interesting conversations, figures. It's the difference between analyzing the McCain-Obama debate and saying, oh, the age difference between the two reminds me of the age difference between Walter Mondale and Ronald Reagan in 1984, which all too often happens. Rather, I would say, let's take that moment and say, what were McCain, Reagan, Obama, Mondale saying about government's role in life? What was their analysis in the 1980s and the analysis today of the economic challenges facing America? What were the governing philosophies behind the various candidacies? And then placing these resonances in a broader historical perspective, all of course in 25-second sound bites.